Good morning, April. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, my good friend Sean Schroeder, who I've been working with on our Story Cycle Gene, said, "Boy, you've got to track down April and see if she would come in and talk about her expertise in brand positioning." So I'm just delighted that you're here.
That's awesome. Well, good.
And I love the fact I was looking through your bio work and whatever, and I love superlatives. I mean, I once had a client say, "Park, you're like the most industrious storyteller I know." So I took that. And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to run with that." And I liked yours when it's like the world's leading B2B business positioning expert.
Yeah. It's a biggie, but I'll tell you, the work I do is actually quite narrowly focused. Like I only work with tech companies. I
Mhm.
only work with B2B tech companies specifically. So I don't do any consumer. I don't even work with a B2B tech company that doesn't have a sales team. Like if you're selling a $100 thing off the website, but you happen to be selling it to businesses, that's outside of my wheelhouse too. So it's actually quite narrow. And I've been doing this for about 10 years. And in that 10 years, I've worked with 300 odd companies. So I do feel like I've done more of this in my tiny box. The box is tiny, but in my tiny box, I rule the tiny box.
Well well, but doesn't that make sense from a brand positioning expert that you've
That's
gotta
right.
niche it down and design a category, own a category with your particular niche?
Well, that's it. I
Yeah.
mean, it'd be kind of funny if I didn't know how to position myself.
So so
That
I
would, yeah, then you probably shouldn't be hiring me. If that was the truth.
Well, I've been in the branding marketing world for, 40 years. And April, I've worked for small agencies and I've done literally everything in the advertising world. And I really found my niche was about brand story creation. It's the thing of taking something complex and simplifying it so people get it. Of course, positioning is a big part of that. So it's not a surprise that you have found yourself as this expert. Can you give us a little bit of a backstory? Because I imagine you didn't wake up as a young lady and say, "I'm gonna be a positioning expert."
Well, heck, I sure didn't. I actually in university, I studied systems design engineering. So, I decided I was gonna go into tech, but, I didn't think I didn't even think I'd end up over on the marketing side of the house, but it's kinda how it worked out. So, when I graduated, I got a job at a startup, and this was a long time ago, like, startups weren't cool. We didn't even call them startups back then. We called it a small tech company is what we called it. And the job that I had, it was product marketing, which is, back then, sometimes that would be a marketing job, but generally not. And the requirements for this job was, we were selling a database. So we are selling a kind of a techie thing to fairly technical people. So the requirements for this job is you needed to be unafraid of public speaking. And I ticked that box. And you also needed to be able to write an SQL query. And I could do that. Then my friend worked there, and so she got me the job, and then that company, so the I got assigned to market a product or be the product marketer for a product. So a lot of what I was doing was supporting the sales team. Anyways, we had a product that, was unsuccessful, let's call it that way. Like, it was a bit of a dog. It never sold well when we launched it, and what we ended up doing was repositioning it. I didn't know that's what we were doing. Nobody called it that. I don't think anybody understood that's what we were doing, but we were gonna end of life the product, and we thought we would mess around with it a little bit and see, well, maybe we could talk about it in a different way. Maybe we could aim it at a different kind of customer. Maybe we could sell it in a different way. And so we repositioned it, and that product took off, became quite successful. We got acquired by a big database company in California. And then after the acquisition, my boss was a rich guy then, so he quit. And they made me the vice president of marketing, which is hysterical because like I can't even spell marketing at this point. And then they transferred every crummy product they had in the company over to me and said, "Can you fix these too?" I was like, "Oh man, I don't even know how we fixed the first one." And so I embarked on this kind of years long journey to figure this out. So, I had coffee meetings with a lot of smart marketing people. it was working for a big company, so they had a training budget, so I did a little post-grad marketing work, took some courses, read a lot of books, and discovered this thing that I had done was called positioning, and and so that kind of started
Mhm.
my interest in this stuff, like, and in particular, I've always been really interested in how do we actually get it done in my context, which is, I'm selling a big ticket, complicated, technical product to very smart, educated people in markets that are extraordinarily crowded. And so, how do we position something so that it actually wins in the market?
Mhm.
So, yeah,
So
so
April,
that's how I ended up here. It was a weird side detour, but here we are.
on that first go at it where you needed to reframe, reposition that product, do you feel like you got lucky or do you think it was intuition? There's something that you innately
It was
understood and didn't
definitely
realize it.
It was definitely not intuition, let me tell you that. There was obviously a bit of luck, but mainly how we did it was customer feedback. So, we had a product, we had sold 100 of them, and, and I because we
And
thought we
what
were
kind of
gonna
product was it?
it was, so the original positioning on this product was we thought what it was a spreadsheet on steroids. So this is a hopped up spreadsheet where you could do database things with it. So you could write a SQL query in the spreadsheet and do things like an in and outer join on a table and all this cool database stuff, but
Nothing
it's a
more
spreadsheet.
sexy than a supercharged database
It was an
spreadsheet.
awesome spreadsheet thing, and so we had another product that sold a lot that was a compiler, so we already had a product we were selling to techie people. So we had gone and talked to these people and said, "Hey, would you like a spreadsheet with SQL query stuff?" And everyone said, "Yes, we would love that." And then so we built it and we sold 100 at $100 each. So this is nothing. This wouldn't even pay for one developer, and we had 5 developers working on the thing. So this is an absolute failure. And so, we expected to sell like 100,000 of them, and we sold 100. So everybody was disappointed. And so they gave me the job because I'm the new gal. They said, "Look, here's the customer list. Call everybody and find out how disappointed they're gonna be when we turn the thing off." And I said, "Okay." So, first of all, I'm calling developers. Like, do you know how much developers like to talk on the phone? They don't
Not at
answer
all.
the Not at all. They don't answer the phone. They don't want to talk to me. So I'm calling, nobody's calling me back. It was very depressing. I'm sending them emails where I have email addresses. I'm sending them emails, but they're not responding to my emails. And I finally got a bunch of them to talk to me, and I used a full-on damsel in distress line. Like, I would leave them the world's most pathetic email and say, "Look, I'm brand new here, and they're gonna fire me if you don't call me and talk to me for 5 minutes." And that actually worked. And then I talked to almost 100 of them. And so I said, "Hey, what you doing with this product?" And they would and so we had this thing. I forget what we originally called it. We changed the name at some point when we repositioned it. But I said, "Hey, you bought this thing. I just calling to see what you're doing with it." And they said, "No, I didn't buy that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, you did actually. I've got the record of it here. Like, on this date, you bought this thing. It's a spreadsheet. It does SQL." And they go, "Oh, that thing. Yeah, it sounded cool. We bought it. We messed around with it a little bit, but and then we stopped using it." And I'm like, "Okay, not going to be sad when we turn it off. I'll put you in that bucket." And so I did like 20 calls like this, and 20 people that didn't even remember they bought it. So I'm like, "Okay, this product is terrible. We're going to shut it off. No one's going to cry." But then I did call 21. Call 21, very different. So I get on the call and I'm like, "Hey, I'm calling you from Wacom. We sold you this thing." And the guy says, "Oh, I love you guys. You guys got me a promotion. Like, this is the best product ever." And I was like, "Really?" And then he gave me this big story about what he was using it for. And it was interesting. So this was, 20 years ago, and it was in the early days of sales teams going out with a laptop.
Mhm.
Before that, sales teams did not they didn't have a laptop. And these folks were selling a thing and they had a catalog of products that they sold. And the way it worked was they had an order system in the office and it was running on an Oracle database and they could put in orders in the office, but they started giving the reps these laptops to go on the road, but you couldn't do an order on the road because the Oracle database didn't work on the laptop. So what they did was took the order, they'd write it down in a Word document or something. Then they
Mhm.
get back to the office and they would re-enter it into the order system and they always forgot something or they got it wrong or they made a mistake or whatever. So what this guy did was he took our little spreadsheet SQL spreadsheet thingy, and he wrote a little app on top of that. And what they could do was put in the order, and then when they got to the office, they plugged the laptop in, and it could sync with the big Oracle database because it had that SQL stuff going.
Mhm.
So he tells me this big story, and I'm like, wow, that's great. And I'm like, oh man, he's gonna be sad when I tell him we're shutting it off. But anyways, I didn't tell him. And so I just put him down in the, weird people that like our stuff box. And so far there was only one person in there. But so I did 20 more calls, 20 more people didn't know. And so in the end I did 100, but then I got another one. And the guy says, "Oh, I love it. It's amazing. You guys made me a rock star in the office." And I said, "Well, what are you doing with it?" And he said, "Well, we got these field service people and they have these ruggedized tablets and they got to do field service stuff, but the big database is back in the office. So now they can actually do it on the ruggedized tablet because we wrote a little application and then you can come back and plug it in. And it's so cool. You guys have that SQL thing and blah, 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 blah." And I was like, "Oh man, here's another one." So I put him in the, so I did 100 calls and I had like 4 or 5 of these folks. So then I had to have the meeting with the execs, and I'm like, good news, bad news situation here, people, right? The good news is 92% of the customer base is not going to care when you shut this thing off. But let me tell you, there's 5% out there that is going to bawl their eyes out because they really love this thing because they're doing this thing. So then we had a big conversation about it and said, all right, like, what if we positioned it for that? Now think about this. Think about it. This isn't just changing the pretty words in the marketing copy. So now I'm going to sell this thing as essentially an embeddable database for mobile devices. How would I sell an embeddable database for mobile devices? Well, I come in and sell your whole sales team. I'm not selling you a onesie twosie off the website. I'm going to come in and sell you 100 of these or maybe 1,000 of these all at once. And so I'm going to need a salesperson to do that. I'm going to need to change my pricing. I'm going to need the whole go to market on this thing has to change. And so this company, the cool thing they did was they looked at that and said, well, let's try it out. And so we hired one sales rep, repositioned the thing, mussed around with the pricing a little bit. We added a couple little features to make it work better in that situation and then let the rep go do it. And at the end of the first month, he'd sold 3,000 of these things. And
Wow.
we're like, "Oh, man, this is good."
You're
So
onto
then we
something
hired
here.
yeah, so then we hired a whole bunch of sales reps, and then next thing you know, revenue is going up to the right, and then we get acquired by this big database company. So we were not kind of trying to come up with the magical creative copy that was going to sell this thing. It wasn't like that at all. It was looking at this surprising way that customers were getting value out of this thing and then saying, well, can we position around that? Could
Mhm.
we do that? And I'll tell you the rest when so later they made me the vice president, they give me all these products. And a lot of these products, you couldn't actually get that information from the customers. Like you talk to a lot of customers, but it was hard to see the pattern. So
Mhm.
I got kind of obsessed with the idea like, how could we have positioned it better in the first place? Like, could we have figured this out without having to pain a failure first?
Yeah.
And that's what I started to get really obsessed about.
And that's what you do now, and I think it's so interesting that you found that 5% of your customers, those initial 100, really got it, found it, gave you that positioning
That's
that you
luck.
needed. But isn't that so true though, quite often when you're rolling something out and you're beta testing it and you think it's gonna do one thing that everybody wants, and then you start asking your beta testers, and it turns out, no, it's actually this thing that they want.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you do get that, but man, you really don't wanna be relying on that because you're basically relying on your customers to tell you what you are. And
Mhm,
if we're in tech and we've invested, I don't know, $10,000,000 in building this thing in the first place, and then we find out it's something else, and oh, by the way, that something else isn't particularly business viable,
mhm,
like, that's not good.
yeah,
So so it is true that, so after that experience, I was involved in a lot of product launches, um, and a better way to do it, I think, is to figure out like to be very deliberate in your positioning thesis, to sit down and say, well, okay, so who do we think we're going to get compared to? And what do we have that's different from that? And so, therefore, what's the business value we can deliver to a customer that no one else can? And then, how do we put a box around these are the kind of customers that are really going to love that? And therefore, this is the market we're going to win. If we had done that for this first product, we would have said, okay, well, who are we going to get compared to? Well, we're probably going to get compared to spreadsheets, other spreadsheets. And then we'd say, well, what have we got that the other spreadsheets don't have? Well, we have this SQL thing. And then we would have asked ourselves the question, well, so what? Like, what's so cool about the SQL thing? Well, the main cool thing about it is it's interoperable with other SQL databases. And if we'd really sat down and thought about that, we'd have said, well, hey, like that means there's a whole bunch of things that you could do with this, and you could make it the little database that lives outside of the main database, but syncs up with it. And
mhm,
we would have landed on this embeddable database for mobile devices. But because we never sat down and did that, we went and talked to customers and said, hey, do you want this? And they said, yeah. And that was good enough for us. We didn't get too deep into what would you do with it? They just thought it sounded cool. So
mhm,
and the first, couple 100 folks that bought us, that's why they bought it. It sounded cool. "Hey, that'd be cool. We could
yeah.
do, like, prototype applications on it or whatever," and they messed around with it and went, nah, it really doesn't do anything. It really
Well, I
doesn't."
think
So
even though you focus in the B2B world and positioning that all listeners, whether they're B2B or B2C or whatever, can certainly learn from that, especially in the tech world, because you are dealing with so much noise, so much competition out there. What are two or three of the biggest mistakes people make
mhm.
when they haven't positioned or they first start thinking about positioning?
Yeah, there's a handful. Like, in tech, the biggest mistake that people make is they think that there's only one way this product could be positioned. So a lot of times what you'll get is the founder of the company gets an idea for a new product and it comes from their own pain, right? So they're working, they're a tech person working at a manufacturing plant and they say, man, the way our ERP system does this is terrible. I'm going to make better ERP. Or they're using their email and they're like, you know what sucks? Email sucks. It's terrible. I'm going to make better email or whatever. And then they go and they make it, right? And then they, they'll get a first version out and customers will say, well, I like this part and I don't like this part and whatever. And so they'll add a bunch of new features. And then the customer will say, I like this and I don't like this. And then if I fast forward a couple of years, I've got this thing and I still think of it as email because, that was my original idea. I'm making better the world's best email. But customers are looking at it and they're like, yeah, but isn't it really more like chat? This thing that you got now, like, what's it? Like, doesn't that? And so, but we're so close to it, we can't see it. And so that's the first one is this trap of thinking, well, there's only one way. Like we're email, what else could we be? Like, like I worked at a company where, it was founded by two guys who were, database people. They had PhDs in database stuff. And we had launched this thing as a database, but later we ended up repositioning it as a data warehouse for machine generated data. And it was hard for the people internally because they were like, we are database people making a database. Like it was really wrapped up in their identity as people, not even just a company. Um, but it was clear, like, the minute we did that shift in positioning, customers were like, "Oh, that oh, shoot, that makes a whole lot more sense.
Mhm.
Now we know what you are. Now we know who we should be comparing you to. Now we know what the value is." So that's mistake number 1 is that. It's thinking that there's no other way to
And I
position it.
suppose that is when you roll it out and you have to really listen to your users, your customers, and they go, "Yeah, you think it's this, but it's actually really that."
Well, normally in tech, I'll tell you, your customers aren't gonna tell you that
Mhm.
because they're not experts in the market. Customers are experts in pain. They're experts in their own situation. They are not experts in solutions. So they're not gonna come to you and say, "Oh, that's not a robot. That's an autonomous vehicle for industrial uses." They don't know what that is. They're not sitting around thinking about this. But you as the vendor, you are. That's your job. It's your job to know what the adjacent market categories are. It's your job to know what this stuff is like. You sometimes get very, very, very lucky, and a very well-educated customer might come and say, "Hey, you know what? That's actually a warehouse and not a database. Why are you calling it that?" But 9 times out of 10, you just fail. You fail because 'cause you're a crappy database that can't win in the database market, and that's it. And everyone votes with their feet and they buy something else. This idea that we're gonna get lucky and the customer is gonna come tell us what the best market category is, I don't think we could bank on that. Now,
Mhm.
we can get feedback from existing customers about how it's working in terms of solving their problem. We can get that, right? Because they're experts in problems. So they can say, "Well, yeah, no, we don't use that." Or they might say, "You know what? If you asked them, "Look, if we didn't exist, what would you do?" Sometimes you get an interesting answer to that question, right? Like, they might say, "Oh, well, if you didn't exist, I'd buy a warehouse." "Oh, that's different." Or, "If you didn't exist, I'd probably just take my spreadsheet and plug it into this thing and do this other thing." Oh, so this is actually the second biggest mistake that people make. Customer or tech companies often make the mistake of not really understanding who their actual competitors are. And so great positioning, I think, starts with that. So I will very often get call from little company and they'll say, "Okay, we got this thing. It's amazing." They'll tell me about it. And I'll say, "Well, who do you compete with?" And they'll say, "Oh, there's a lot of competitors." And they'll give me the big long list. Little bunch of little guys I never heard of. And I'll be like, "Okay, never heard of any of those guys, but okay." And I say, you know, so how do you like when you're out there, like, do these guys beat you in deals? All these little guys? And they'll say, "No, we win every time against these guys." And I'm like, "Hmm, how do you win?" They say, "Oh, ease of use. If you look at all of them, it's clickety click, 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 takes 19 clicks to do a thing, but if you use ours, it only takes 2 clicks. So all our positioning is around ease of use. Buy us because it's more streamlined, easy to use, get it done fast." And I'm like, "Okay." And then I said, "Well, you ever lose to those guys?" "No, never." I'm like, "Well, you don't win every single deal. Like, you're a little weak company, you don't win every single deal. So when you lose, what happens?" And they say, "Oh, well, we don't lose to those guys. We just lose to no decision." Ah, no decision. So, but the customer still has the problem. So how are they solving it? And they say, "Oh, they're just using a spreadsheet or they're hiring an intern to do it." Ah, ah. So your real competition is the intern and you're positioned around ease of use. Do you know what's really easy to use? The intern is very easy to use. You
Right.
say, "Hey, Joey, get me a coffee. Go out there, fill out the spreadsheet when you come back." Like, you're never going to win against the intern on ease of use. But the intern is bad at a whole bunch of stuff. Like, the intern makes mistakes. The intern quits on you. The intern doesn't know the whole history of every interaction that you've ever had with this particular client. Like, there's all kinds of things that software can do that the intern can't do. So, but step number 1 is recognizing that you compete with the intern and not these 19 little things that, frankly, your customers have never heard about them. They're not putting them on the short list. All they're doing is saying, "Should we stop using the intern to use you?" And so
Mhm.
your positioning needs to answer that question. Why me versus the intern?
Isn't that interesting? Because I could see exactly why that would work. We're so caught up in the business and our product,
Right.
and we're looking at the competitor. We don't take a deep breath, pump the brakes, and look around and say, "Well, wait a minute. What is the actual human dynamic going on here?" And
Right.
you're competing with an intern. That's very interesting.
Well, often in tech, this is often true. Like in tech, we often have two categories of competitors. So we have whatever the status quo is. Like this is a new problem. Customers got the problem and they're solving it right now. They're just solving it with band-aids and binder twine.
Hmm.
Like they've got spreadsheets and junky old legacy stuff that was never meant to do that. And their IT guys are writing custom code to bubblegum the whole thing together, and it's terrible, but it does the job, right? And so you gotta but change into something else is effort. And so you gotta beat that. You gotta beat the status quo. You gotta say, why is this worth the effort to actually change and do something different? But when the customer does decide they're gonna change, I mean, anybody good is gonna say, well, I'm not just gonna go with you because you're the first guy that called me. I'm gonna look at it, make a short list, and I'm gonna go through an actual purchase process. So not only do you have to beat status quo, but you gotta beat whoever lands on the short list. But you know, if there's a competitor out there that you Googled them and you looked at their homepage, and they look like they're just like you and they sound just like you, but they never end up on a customer short list, guess what? They're not your competition. They're a ghost. You don't have to
Hmm.
compete against a ghost. I don't have to position against that. I don't know why they're not showing up in deals. It doesn't matter. And if at some point in the future they do show up in deals, well, then I can adjust my positioning to compensate for that later. But if they're not showing up on a short list, I don't have to worry about it. So
Hmm.
if we're the starting point on a good positioning exercise when we're in tech is, do we really understand what the status quo is that we're replacing? And do we really understand who lands on a short list and a typical customer against us? That's our stake in the ground. That's the answer to the question, what do I have to position against? Or put another way, what do I have to beat in order to get a deal?
Hmm. That's fascinating. Do you have a third one? We were talking about the top three
Yeah, do I have a
problems.
third one? Um, Let me see. Well, okay, here's the third one. This may be controversial, but and this is probably not true in a lot of different industries, but it is absolutely true in tech. Is we cannot do positioning as a little project in the marketing department. If we do that, it will fail. And And I learned this the hard way from trying to do it as a little project in the marketing
Right.
department. And here's what happens when you do that. You'll have your genius positioning, and then you will walk over to the sales team and say, this is how we're positioning it now. Here's the story I would like you to tell, blah, blah, blah. And sales looks at that and says, yeah, no, don't get it. Don't believe in it. Don't like it. I'm just going to keep pitching it the way I pitch it now. And you'll get the same thing over in product management. You'll go over to product management and they'll be like, no, disagree, disagree. This is not why we win. This is not how we win. Disagree. And worse, the worst one is you have your founder, and your founder is not just talking to customers, your founder's talking to investors, your founder's talking to all kinds of people, and they got a completely different point of view on this. And you show up with your little marketing exercise, here it is, and the founder's like, no way, don't agree. No. And then where are you at? No place. That's where you're at. So trying to do this in marketing without getting buy-in from the founder and product management and sales is a waste of your time. So if we're going to go fix this in a tech company, it needs to be a cross-functional exercise. I need to bring sales into the process. Particularly sales, but I need to have, if I've got a founder or a business unit leader that cares a lot about the way this thing is positioned, they got to be part of the process too, because if they're not, the positioning, you might come up with gorgeous positioning, it's never going to stick.
Hmm. Well, this is very timely for us, and I sent you the output of our story cycle genie on your brand.
Oh
And
boy.
so, we are that somewhat of that tech founder too, taking my branding process that I've worked over the last 20 years and, put it through an AI, and we've got our own proprietary story cycle genie now. And did you get a chance to take a look at what I sent you?
I did not see anything from you. So sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll send it back over to you and take a look at
Yeah.
it. But what I
No,
did,
how
April,
did it go? Tell me something I don't know about my own stuff. Let's hear it.
well, and what it did is we went and just simply uploaded your website, gave it
Was
to your
just a website. Most
you
people don't find me from the website.
No, but URL, and then I went to some of your book pages and so forth, just did some intel on who you were, gave it those URLs, and here's the first it first looks at it, and here's the brand assessment, and it's a very short paragraph. Let me read it to you and see how
Sure.
it lands for you. April Dunford positions herself as the world's leading expert on product positioning for B2B tech companies. With 25 plus years of experience as a marketing executive at successful startups and having worked with 200 plus companies, she helps businesses clarify how they're different and better than alternatives. Her approach focuses on practical, structured methodologies that align teams around positioning that makes products intuitively understood by customers. Through workshops, consulting, speaking, and books, she transforms complex positioning challenges into clear, compelling narratives that accelerate sales.
All right.
Did that capture you?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Then it went on, and by the way, it ran it, and it took about 2 minutes. And so then the next step is once it grabs your positioning, it says, okay, who are April's top 3 audiences in order of priority? And
Mm.
what does each audience, what are their challenges, frustrations, fears, and aspirations? So we won't go through all 3 of them, but the first one it says is B2B tech executives, CEOs, CMOs, CROs. That's your number 1 audience. Their challenges: articulating a clear, compelling story about why their product matters, aligning leadership teams around a consistent positioning strategy, translating technical features into meaningful customer value, and standing out in increasingly crowded competitive markets. Sound like the challenges that you help them overcome?
I mean, all this stuff is in actual copy on my website, so yeah.
So it's pulling it and it's bringing it together. And what the genie does is gives you a reflection of how you're showing up in the world. And then what I've heard, I've taken about 70 brands through it now during our beta. Does 3 major things for you. It helps validate the communication and how you're telling your story. It shows you the gaps in how you're telling your story, in that if it's not coming up with something that should be there, means it's probably not prominent or maybe doesn't exist at all in your marketing materials. And then the final thing is it gives you fresh, inspiring ways to talk about your brand that maybe you hadn't considered before. So these challenges, fears, frustrations, aspirations, these are going to be the story leverage points that you would use to speak with your customers. So their fears: losing market share to competitors with inferior products but better positioning, missing growth targets and disappointing investors, making the wrong strategic bets on positioning and messaging, being perceived as just another commodity in their category. Their frustrations: marketing messages that don't resonate with target customers, sales teams telling inconsistent stories about the product, wasting resources on ineffective marketing initiatives, and lengthy sales cycles due to poor market understanding. And then finally, April, their aspirations. What is it they want? So we've talked about their pain points, but what do they ultimately want? Building a category defining company that customers instantly understand, creating a clear, compelling story that the entire organization rallies behind, accelerating sales cycles through intuitive positioning, and commanding premium pricing based on differentiated value. Did it capture that fairly accurately?
This is the big sales pitch for your product we're getting here.
Sure it is. Of course it is,
I
because
didn't realize that's what I signed up for here. All right, keep
no, we
going.
signed up for your brilliance, but what better person to bounce this off of than someone who knows
Yeah.
this stuff
Well,
inside
I
and
do
out?
think that I'm a like I'm the positioning person, so it would be a
Mhm.
bit surprising if what you got out of that didn't look like, you know, what the way I thought I was positioning
But
there.
you are
But I
you are
would
the
assume
unicorn.
that right, I'm a weird one for this, right? But I would
You're
assume
the
if you
top of the
point
heap.
that at anybody else's, like a typical company's website, there's gonna be a lot of stuff there that they're surprised about.
Yes, there actually absolutely is, and it wrote this unique value prop for you, and that is practical positioning that makes your unique value obvious.
Mhm.
Is that something that you say on your website, or is that something it just
Yeah,
kind of
like, the
pulled
name of my
together?
book is called Obviously Awesome.
Okay. So it's placing So it's coming and giving you
Yeah, so
then
it's
that
coming from that's coming from my copy on my website. Yeah. I'll tell you
revealing it.
though, it's interesting,
Mhm.
like, most folks, this that it's a thing that you get into sometimes with tech companies, like, what is the job of the website? Um, and sometimes in big ticket B2B stuff, the job of the website is to clearly communicate the value, right? Why pick us over the other folks? Sometimes the job of the website is not quite that. Like, so for example, sometimes what we have is um, a product like growth motion. So there's a free product available on the website. And so the job of the website is to get people into that free product as quickly as possible. So you might have, let's say, two big value propositions that you really lean into that are really important that would convert a trial customer to a paid customer, but you may not need to go deep into those 2 things to get a customer into the product. And then the goal is once they're in the product, then I'm gonna hit them with all my other stuff, or I'm gonna allow them to discover this stuff in my product that then converts them. Or similarly, sometimes what I have is I'm trying to get end users into the product, but the sales motion is actually nothing to do with end users. So, there's a company that I work with called Postman. They have an extremely popular free tool to do API testing. Their paid thing that they make millions of dollars on has nothing to do with API testing alone. It's actually a platform for developing, testing, deploying for everything, the full life cycle of everything you want to do in an API. So if you were to analyze their website, you might be like, oh, I don't know if this is good positioning or not, because the website is partially tuned to get you into this free thing. And then what they do is they look at who's what companies are using a lot of the free thing, and then their sales teams are coming in way over top of the end users at a C level and saying, You guys have APIs. You're doing a reasonable investment in testing those APIs. There's a lot of things that impact the quality of an API upstream and downstream from the API testing. What you actually need is a platform that manages the full thing, and that's going to help you deliver higher quality APIs and do it faster. Now, you don't necessarily get that story on the website because that is not their go to market motion.
Mhm.
So we
But
have to be a
we're
little bit
looking
careful on
yeah.
things like this, that we understand what's the job of the website, and is the website doing its job?
Well, that's
Because
where the
sometimes
human
people will
comes
come to
in,
me and
right?
say, if we don't have a perfect representation of the positioning on the homepage, then we've done something wrong. But I can think of a lot of examples where that's not the job of the homepage, actually. The job
Mhm.
of the homepage is something slightly different. But anyways, this is like the positioning 501 conversation that
Yeah, I love
versus
it
the
though.
positioning 101 conversation. But in tech, we have all these weird examples where the job isn't exactly that. Even if I think of my own website, and I've done some thinking about this, the majority of the folks that hit my website are all come to my website because they've read my book. They find out of the book about the book not on my website. They find out about the book either word of mouth from other people that have read the book or other companies I've worked with or whatever, or they've seen me at a conference. But they don't see me at a conference and go to my website. I don't think that ever happens. I think they see me at a conference and they go, that sounds interesting. I should buy that book.
Mhm.
And then they read the book. And then they don't come to my website until they're in a jam. So
Right.
they read the book and then they're like, "Oh, we're in a jam. We should call that lady." And they don't call just me, they call lots of other people too. But I get on the list, right? Because they read the book or whatever. And then they get to the website and then they talk. And so is my job doing a good job of that? I don't know. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it, but maybe I should spend more time worrying about it, to tell
Or
you the
not
truth.
worrying about it, but just paying, maybe attention to it. And my question for you, April, is you work with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies. How often, when you get a new engagement, you go and you look at their website to learn more about them, and it's unclear, it's not concise, it speaks from the brand's perspective, not the customer's problem perspective. And you see that there are, because you're a storyteller as well, with your second book with Sales Pitch. That they're just not sharing a good, clear, compelling story.
Well, so one thing I've learned from working with B2B tech companies in particular is this isn't like selling toothpaste. Like, generally, the companies I work with are, selling hundreds of millions of dollars of a very specialized thing to a very specialized audience. And that audience isn't me. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not a typical buyer. And so, generally, I'm not in a great position to look at the website. So, one, I need to understand the whole go to market motion to understand what the job of the website is. And then two, I need to understand, like, well, who are the competitors and how are they trying to differentiate from the competitors? And then who are the buyers and what do those buyers consider to be valuable or not valuable? What do those buyers understand or don't understand? So, for example, if I'm selling to a very technical CIO at a bank, I can use a bunch of technical terminology that I wouldn't use if I was selling to the director of sales at, a retail company. And so just looking at the website, because I see this a lot with like inexperienced folks that are in marketing, they'll say, "Oh my god, look at that website. It's so terrible. It's got all this jargon in it. You should be writing so that your grandmother understands it." And I'm like, "I don't know. If I'm not selling to grandmothers, do I really have to be writing it so my grandmother understands it?" So, when companies call me, a lot of times they'll ask me. They'll say, "What do you think of the website?" And I'll say, "I don't know enough yet
Mhm.
to evaluate your website, because in order to really evaluate it, what I need to understand is, one, what's the job of the website? And then two, who do you compete with? How do you, what do you got that's different? What is your differentiated value? Who's the buyer, the champion in a deal to make one of these deals happen? And what do those people care about? And once you have all of that, then you can back up and look
Mhm.
at the website and say, "Okay, no, this isn't working," or, "Yeah, this is actually kinda getting at it, but we could probably improve it." Um, so, yeah, so I try not to in the workshops I do, what we do is we assemble a cross-functional team and we work through this process. And I generally come in with a little bit of an inkling of where I think the positioning is weak and where I think it's strong, but I am very often surprised. I'm very often surprised that when we get to the value step of this, very often there's information that comes out from folks on the team that you wouldn't know unless you were in the trenches with this product, selling it every day to the kinds of customers they're selling to. And so I try to keep a kind of, you know, open mind about it as we're working through the workshop, because I don't think I'm qualified to go in and say, your positioning needs to look like this. I need to suck the deep expertise out of the team that has been working on it. And, if you have a sales team, I've got salespeople that have been in lockstep with a customer everywhere along a purchase process. So they know a lot. They know what status quo is that they're coming off. They know how they made the short list, why they made the short list. If they get chosen, they know why they get chosen. If they don't, they know why they didn't get chosen. Product management, on the other hand, knows a lot about differentiation. They know who the other products are in the market and what the differentiators are. And, we do it this way, but those guys do it this way, or we have this feature and those guys don't have that feature. Marketing understands a lot about how to get a prospect's attention in the research phase of a purchase process when a customer is just trying to figure out what do they need to know, what do they not need to know, what's going on. And then you've got the founder CEO, which, usually has this kind of depth of understanding of, the whole reason we built this thing in the first place, man, was because of this. And they've worked with a ton of customers, maybe not recently, but they have a real point of view on this too. And so I got to get all those people in the room, suck all that information out of them. And then I got to have a process that allows us to build this positioning that kind of keeps everybody's sort of opinions out of it. And we're sticking to the facts of the situation.
Mhm.
So that's
And
kind of how I work with this stuff.
no, I love it, and that works with big and small enterprises alike, right? So sometimes you're in there working with big, vast sales teams and marketing teams, and I imagine other times you're with a five-person, quote, unquote, "startup" trying to help them get there.
Yeah, most of the companies I work with now are bigger. Like when I started, I did a lot of small companies, but one of the things we have in tech products is that we start with we build the product with a positioning thesis, whether we're conscious of it or not, right? So we built this product to be, this thing in the market against these other products, and this is how we thought it was going to win. And then we launch it. The first wave of customers in a B2B tech product is really all about validating your thesis. Like, were you right?
Mhm.
Like, we thought little quick serve restaurants were going to love our stuff. But then when we launched it, it turned out family style sit down restaurants like our stuff more. And so we felt more market pull there. So we're going to go explore that. Well, do we have the right product for that? And how would it work? And can we reach those people? Can we do it at scale? How big is that market? Can we actually make our sales target if we just focused on that? All this stuff has got to happen. And so in the early days of a tech company, again, it's not like toothpaste, right? Where you just launch it and it either wins in the market or it doesn't. And if it's a failure, it's a big old flop, right? In tech, we often adjust the positioning a lot in the early days of a product because we're like, oh, well, we were basically right. But it turned out this little thing we didn't consider. And so now we gotta change for that. So I don't think companies like that have a brand new thing in the market and haven't been through that first wave of customers where you can really learn who loves our stuff and why, I think it's too early to bring in a consultant and pay money to try to tighten up a thing that is probably going to change in 2 weeks when you close two more deals and you learn something else.
Mhm.
And so so I generally disqualified little guys now. Like if I don't think they have enough traction in the market, like, I'm like, "Look, like, you don't wanna pay someone to build a thesis. Like, what you want is you just wanna go close 10 more deals, and then the positioning will either be obvious or it won't, but you'll at least be starting to see the patterns, and if you can't figure it out, come back to me." So, most of the companies that I work with are in market. They've got a little bit of traction, like and generally, if they're coming to me, it's at a minimum, it's a few million revenue. Um and then I would say right now I'm working more with companies that are like 100 million, 200 million, 300 million revenue, sometimes really, really big, a division inside a really, really big company like an IBM or a Google. And the positioning problems are slightly different. They're not trying to figure out the initial positioning at that point. They've got positioning that worked up to a point, but now we have new competitors in the market. Maybe we've come out with something that's really new and different, and we're going to have to adjust the positioning to account for that. Maybe we've done an acquisition. Maybe we're thinking about doing an IPO and we want to tell this maybe kind of bigger story. And a lot of times what I've got is a really big company, they've acquired 3 or 4 little things and smushed them together into a
Mhm.
business unit and said, "Okay, salespeople, go sell this." And the salespeople are like, "I don't know how these 3 things come together, man. Like, you tell me what that story should be. They all look different to me." So we're usually working on problems like that.
Mhm. Can a startup in doing their beta testing, providing they have a large enough cohort in that beta test, get a good sense of their positioning for their product? If they think it's one thing going into the
Yeah.
beta, but then their customers are saying, "No, actually, it does that. That's good, but I really like it for this."
Well, you gotta be a little bit careful, that you don't start building a custom product for one customer. That's called, you know custom development. We don't wanna do that. So we're trying to build a product that we can sell to a whole market. So you're right, we need to get enough signal, and we might get some feedback. The customer will say, "Well, I would have bought that if it had XYZ." But then you find out, well, they're weird, and they want XYZ because 'cause they're weird, but there's this whole other part of the market that doesn't care about XYZ, and we could sell to them all day. So that's what you're trying to do. Like, you're looking to validate this thesis. So if the thesis says, well, the value is this, therefore these kind of customers should be really easy to close and then you get out there and you find like they're actually hard to close. Like, they're like, well, I don't know. I don't really get it. And I don't know. Why wouldn't I just do it this other way? Whatever. And you're just not feeling the pull. Then you're going to have to go fish in other ponds and see, well, okay, maybe that value wasn't as valuable as we thought it was, or maybe that type of customer wasn't as easy as we thought it was. It's not usually in the early stages of a product, we'll get a lot of no's, right? And we often don't get truthful answers about the no. So, so I think it's a mistake to take the no's the feedback you get on the no's too seriously, right? Because the customer will say, "Well, I didn't pick you because you were too small and it was too risky." But but it turned out they were never really considered you. They just put you on the list because 'cause purchasing told them they had to look at 3 products and you were easy to eliminate, right? So they had already made up their mind. Or they'll say, "Oh, the thing was too expensive. We didn't have the budget." Or they'll give you all kinds of reasons. But the no the reason is not always the truth, because they didn't buy
Mhm.
from you. They got no skin in this game. You come and say, "Well, why didn't you buy?" They'll just tell you whatever to get you off the phone.
Mhm.
Flip side of this, if you're looking at the yeses, like if we have a brand new product in a brand new market, yes is like a miracle. Yes is like, "Oh my gosh, somebody wants to buy our thing. This is a precious, precious miracle, and we should understand everything about that. Like, how did we make it on the short list versus all these other established competitors? Why on earth did they put us on the short list? And then they evaluated us and they picked us. What the heck happened there?" And we should understand all about that. And is there something about that customer that made them a really good fit for our product? And can we go out and find other customers like that?
Mhm.
So in the early days, I think we're really looking for what we call win analysis as opposed to loss analysis, which, we're going to lose 90%.
Yeah.
It's a brand new product. It's amazing. Anyone buys it. So I think we find out a lot more from the ones where we're winning, that we come in and we say, okay, what
Yeah,
worked
why?
there?
Why'd you like
Yeah.
it?
Like,
Mhm.
why? Like, take me back. Like, what were you doing before? And what made you wake up in the morning and decided you had to do something different? And then how the heck did we make it on the short list? And who else made it on the short list? Why'd you pick us? And then here's a good question to ask. Why not the other guys? Because sometimes the other guys stepped in it and that's why you won. It's not so much that you won, the other guys lost it
Mhm.
because they
Yeah.
couldn't do something or they did something wrong. And all of this stuff is really important to understand when you're thinking about in the early days of a product, like where are we going to focus? What's the best target market for us? What should we be building in the product to strengthen our position in that beachhead market? That's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah. At the top of the show, you had mentioned that very first, product that was failing, and you had 100 users, and you were reaching out to talk to them. What, in your experience, what number of users early on, how many do you have to get before you can really get good intel of what's working and what's not?
Yeah, this is a great question. In my opinion, so first of all, it's often not users that we want to talk to. What we want to talk to is a buyer. But in B2B tech, a typical B2B tech purchase doesn't get made by a single person. It's like a group. And if we look at the research on this, a typical B2B enterprise software deal, that group is anywhere from 5 to a dozen people big. So we've got this 12 people who impact this deal. And so let's say, for example, I'm selling something to the sales team, um, to make the sales team more effective. Well, I've got the champion of the deal is usually the person that got assigned to go figure this out. So, maybe you have the vice president of sales that wakes up and says, "You know what I hate? I hate this CRM. Let's get rid of this stupid thing. John, you go figure it out." And John's like, "Ah, crap." Okay. and so John is now the champion of this deal. He has been tasked with doing the research, making a short list, figuring it out. His boss, the VP sales, that's what we call the economic buyer. That person's going to write the check, and ultimately, this champion has got to go to the economic buyer and convince them. But it's the champion of the deal is going to decide whether or not you get on the short list. The champion of the deal is then once they've made a short list and figured out who they want to look at, they got to run around and convince everybody else. So probably because they're not IT, but this thing is IT, they probably have to go over to IT and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about buying this CRM," and IT is going to go, "Well, does it meet our security things? And does it integrate with our ERP? And does it do whatever? And if it doesn't do these things, I'm going to say no." Right? And then they got to go talk. Then maybe they got to go talk to users. And the sales team is like, "We don't like it. It's too hard to use." No, right? And maybe they got to go to purchasing, and purchasing says, well, did you do your homework? And does it meet the whatever? And did you negotiate whatever? Because otherwise, we're going to say no. So think about it this way. I got this champion person, and my positioning really, really has to resonate for them. Because if it doesn't resonate for them, I don't even get to talk to anybody else. And so I gotta, so when I'm doing this workshop and I'm thinking about this positioning, it's gotta really resonate for this champion person. And then our job in marketing and sales is to arm that person to handle the objections of everybody else. Now, coming back to your, so this is my little preamble. Coming back to your question, like okay, so how many deals you got to do before you know, like, how many customers you got to talk to before you know you've talked to enough? Well, sometimes we are selling a thing that's like $1,000, and this deal isn't very complicated. There's an economic buyer, there's a champion, maybe they talk to one other person. We get this deal done in a month, and with maybe 2 sales calls. Well, if that's true, there's probably a lot of variability in the customers. And so I'm gonna have to talk to more customers because they're all kind of different. Whereas if I'm selling a thing that costs $5 million and it takes me a year and a half to close, I'm not gonna have that many customers, but that's okay because 'cause I'm making $5 million on every single one. And those customers tend to all sort of look the same because that's just the way that stuff works out. So companies will often come to me and they'll say, "Well, I don't know, April, do you think we've done enough deals for you to actually tighten up the positioning and let's go?" And they'll say, "How many deals should we do?" And I'm usually ask them, "Well, how big's the deal? How long does it take? Do the customers seem uniform?" Like if they're all the same and you can see that repeatability, then I probably don't need that many because they all kind of look the same and they all behave the same way and they all have the same sense of value. Um, but if I'm doing a whole bunch of little deals and they all sort of look this different, like, you know, they're in different industries and it's different buyers and different personas and everything looks different and I can't see the patterns, then I think that's going to be very hard to position and the company maybe needs to do more until
Mhm.
they start seeing these patterns pop up. So I've had companies call me and they've got 500, 600 customers and I don't think they have it because the customers all look wildly different.
Yeah.
But I've had I worked with a company once that called me and they said, "Well, we only have 3 customers, um, and so maybe we don't have enough." And I said, "Well, how long does it take you to close a deal?" And they said, 18 months. And I was like, "Wow, that's a long time." And they said, "Yeah, well, they're pretty big deals though." And I said, "Well, what's your revenue?" And they only had 3 customers and their revenue was 35 million.
Not bad.
So it also meant that they had about a dozen deals in the pipeline because,
Yeah.
it takes you 18 months to do a deal. And those deals were far enough along that we know a lot about those companies. So it wasn't really 3, it was really 3 plus a dozen. And in that case, it was like, and they all look exactly the same. They were all big call centers kind of using it for the exact same use case, all the thing. I was like, yeah, okay, that sounds like
Yeah.
enough. We could go do that.
Yeah, because in our beta, we put about 70 brands through it, and they are across different industries. It could be agencies, it can be solopreneurs, it can be, nonprofits are going through it, whatever. And
Mm,
we are getting, a lot of great feedback, but we're definitely seeing trending in what
yeah.
they value, even though they're in a lot of different industries.
Right. Well, what you might find is that, and we think about this a lot in tech, right? What we might find is, oh, these folks over here love me this way, and these folks over here love me this way. There's some commonality in that. So sometimes you're selling something that's horizontal. Like I spent a lot of time selling databases. This is a fundamentally horizontal technology. It doesn't matter if you're in banking or retail or in whatever. You're using a database in a kind of fundamentally the same way. But that said, we generally worry a lot about segmenting the market out so that we can focus on, in the short term, on the folks that are the easiest to sell to. So, for example, I worked on this database and this database was particularly good at a particular kind of query with a particular kind of data. And our original assumption was anybody that had a lot of data would want this thing because it did these queries on this giant amount of data really, really fast. But what we found was if it was machine generated data and you needed the answer to that query to do customer service because a customer was calling in and wanted the answer to it, those folks, that was a hair on fire problem, and it was really easy to sell to them. If it was like a bank and there's some weird query that they only run once a month, and yeah, it takes a long time to run it. We have to run it over the weekend, but who cares? We only do it once. And so they had the problem. It just wasn't a hair on fire problem. And so they were harder to sell to. We sold a couple of them. Um, but we spent our marketing and sales efforts on these ones that were like, oh my gosh, if you could, if you could solve this problem, we'd serve our customers way better. It would save us a lot of hassle. We'd make a lot more money. We'd have way happy customers, and there was its immediate benefit. So sometimes when you have this thing, it's worthwhile to lean back and say, is there a segment of this market? We know lots of people love us in lots of different ways, but is there a segment of this market that goes, whoa, that's awesome? And can we peel them off and just focus on them? And we'll get to the rest of the market later. But we'll focus on these folks first because I spend less marketing dollars getting them in the door. I spend less sales effort getting them closed. They really get the value, so they don't ask for a discount. They close really fast, they renew, they tell their friends about us, like, this is what you want your pipeline to look like in the early days.
Well, isn't that it? I mean, repeat business and word of mouth marketing. If they love you and they love what's the problems you're solving for them, they're going to share that with their world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, April, this has been absolutely a masterclass on positioning. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you like, I will send you back again the Genie report on your brand. And I wasn't surprised that it nailed it because your copy is very, very good, but it's an outlier. It's, you
Yeah,
position
well,
yourself
good.
very
I'm happy
well.
to be an outlier on that one.
Absolutely. Where can people learn more about you?
It's aprildunford.com, man. Come in and, look at my, glorious positioning.
Absolutely. Well, April, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Alright, well, thanks so much for having me.